Truth is stranger than fiction, and this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
Brusher Mills of the New Forest, England, caught 3,186 venomous snakes in 14 years with his bare hands. He was so skilled that he was never bitten. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you the story of the Sad Chateau. The Chateau of Montal in France was built as a surprise for Robert de Balzac by his mother in the year 1534. However, it has inscribed on one wall, "There is no hope left." The reason for this sad inscription is that just as the castle was completed, Mrs. Jeanne de Balzac received the tragic news that her son had been slain in battle 9 years earlier. Believe it or not.
Truth is stranger than fiction, and this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
The tombstone of Margaret Johnston and her 6 children in Trennet, Scotland, was erected over an empty grave. The family vanished in the 17th century without a trace. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you about the man who paid for his own assassination. When a man lends another man money, he certainly does not intend that it should be used to pay for his own assassination. But such was the case with William the Silent, father of Dutch independence, who advanced 12 crowns to a man by the name of Balthazar Gerard. Gerard had requested an audience with William, and the money was given to him to pay for his transportation. But the money was used by Gerard to buy a gun with which he shot William dead. Believe it or not.
Truth is stranger than fiction, and this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
When Kit Carson, the famous scout, was a boy of 17 in Franklin, Missouri, he ran away from the saddle maker to whom he was apprenticed, and the official reward for his recapture was 1 cent. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you about the reward given to a thrifty nephew. Thurston Manor and its vast estate in Scotland was to be willed by Mrs. Agnes Hunter, a widow, to one of her 3 nephews, who she invited to come visit her. The first nephew arrived riding in a coach. The second nephew came on horseback. But Robert Hunter, the third nephew, showed up on foot. His thrifty aunt was so impressed, she bequeathed to him all of her property. Believe it or not.
Truth is stranger than fiction, and this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
Preston Hall in Scotland was built by Lord Adam Gordon, who spent every working hour of 31 years supervising its construction. On the day it was completed, he lost interest in the castle and sold it. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you about the world's tallest bouquets. Whenever people want to say something on a special occasion, many times they say it with flowers. And although flowers come in many colors, shapes, and sizes, the tallest bouquets in the world are found in Austria. The residents of the Lungau district carry them in a church parade each June 24th. And the bouquets which they carry comprise 25,000 flowers each. The bouquet stands 26 feet high. Believe it or not.
Truth is stranger than fiction, and this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
Prayaga, a Hindu fakir, buried himself in sand with only his arms exposed to extend a begging bowl to people passing by 6 hours each day for 12 years. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you how Dunder Rock got its name. History tells of many great naval battles, but one of the most unusual sea battles that never took place happened in Dunder Rock on Lake Champlain near Burlington, Vermont. Dunder Rock so resembles the outline of a gunboat that a Dutch captain mistook it for an enemy vessel and fired a broadside at it. The stone got its name from the captain's exclamation when he discovered his mistake. Dunder was a blunder, believe it or not.
Truth is stranger than fiction, and this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
The casket of Queen Elizabeth I, while on view in Whitehall Palace, London, mysteriously exploded. The coffin was shattered, yet the Queen's body was unharmed. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you about a fantastic pilgrimage. The pilgrims to Mount Kailas in Tibet indulge in the most fantastic pilgrimages in the world. They must circle the 22,000-foot mountain on their stomachs. They complete each circuit in the bitter cold, and this requires 3 weeks. Yet many of the pilgrims circle the mountain in this manner 12 times, alternately rising and prostrating themselves day and night for 9 months. Believe it or not.
Truth is stranger than fiction, and this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
Ludwig Weber, an innkeeper of Richest, Austria, was so powerful that he could raise a 100-pound cask to his lips at the age of 80. He drank a total of 50,000 quarts of wine in his lifetime. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you about the church inspired by a footstool. The architecture of St. John's Church in London, England, was inspired by a footstool. It was built by Thomas Archer for Queen Anne, who, because she was preoccupied with affairs of state, simply kicked over a wooden footstool and told the architect, "Go build me a church like that." The 4 towers of St. John's Church were Archer's efforts to create a structure like an overturned footstool. Believe it or not.
Truth is stranger than fiction, and this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
The 7th Earl of Crichton, while entertaining King James I of England, guided the monarch to his bedchamber by igniting a parchment recording a $1,500,000 loan he had made to the king. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you about the dancing corpses. One of the strangest funeral rites in the world is carried on by the Kapsiki tribe of Africa. When a wealthy native of the tribe dies, he's prepared after death for the gay life a person of standing is expected to lead when he goes on into the next world. This is done by hoisting his corpse onto the shoulders of the village blacksmith. The cadaver is then given dancing lessons that last for hours. As a result, they are known as the dancing corpses. Believe it or not.
Truth is stranger than fiction, and this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
Duncan MacIntyre, the greatest poet of the Scottish Highlands, whose literary magnitude has been compared to Robert Burns, could neither read nor write. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you about a strange 14th century vigil. A bed has been kept ready for the arrival of a guest for more than 1,400 years. A monk named Pao Chi died in the year 514 in the Memorial Temple of Hangzhou, China. His last words were, "I shall return." Apparently, Pao Chi's fellow monks took him at his word, because they've changed the linen on Pao Chi's bed more than 57 million times over the last 14 centuries. Believe it or not.
Truth is stranger than fiction, and this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
There is a boulder in France so delicately balanced it nods affirmatively if the weather's clear and shakes from side to side if a storm is brewing. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you about a most unique man of letters. When Joseph Bernhard Dochen said, "Take a letter," miracles were about to happen. Herr Dolchen, director of the National Library in Munich, Germany, was able to dictate 9 letters on 9 subjects to 9 secretaries in 9 languages simultaneously. He also mastered the Bible so thoroughly he could repeat all chapters and books from the Old and New Testaments faultlessly from memory, forward or backward. Believe it or not.
Truth is stranger than fiction. And this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
Peter Minuit, who bought Manhattan Island for all of $24, was fired by the Dutch for extravagance. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you about the man who knows precisely when he will die. The coronation of a newly elected Temne chief has a touch of the macabre to it. During the coronation, the Kamrabi, or chief counselor, conducts the chief to the beach, which is strewn with a variety of pebbles. The ruler, blindfolded, grabs as many pebbles as he can hold in one fist. The pebbles are carefully counted, and the ruler is allowed 1 year of life for each pebble he was able to grab. At the expiration of his allotted span, a new ruler is chosen, the old ruler poisoned. Believe it or not.
Truth is stranger than fiction. And this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
Cornelius Den Hartog of Oskaloosa, Iowa, smoked the same cigar twice in 50 years. He smoked half of it on his wedding day and saved the other half for his golden wedding anniversary 50 years later. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you about the world's richest heiress. You'd think a man with money would know something about arithmetic, but not the husband of Countess Elizabeth Angelique de Botteville of 17th century France. In his will, he left his wife 1 gold piece worth $5 for the first year of her widowhood. This amount was to be doubled each year as long as she remained unmarried. The Countess lived 69 years, and her legal claim amounted to about $737 quintillion. Believe it or not.
Truth is stranger than fiction. And this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
For 60 years, the price of cotton was reported daily to the grave of Al McGee of Glenville, Alabama, out of respect for a dying wish. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you about the greatest lover of them all. Harihara II, king of Vijayanagar, India, in 1398, had 12,000 wives, but they were not enough. The king fell in love with a girl from a neighboring kingdom merely because he heard she was beautiful. To force her into marriage, he began a war against her country. But his neighbor, Pharaoh Shah Tughlaq, proved far more powerful, and the marrying king lost his kingdom, his fortune, his 12,000 wives, and his life. Believe it or not.
Truth is stranger than fiction. And this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
The Pond of the Apostles in Chipperfield, England, is circled by 11 lime trees, each named for an apostle. A 12th tree named Judas was blown down by the wind. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you about a fantastic burglar alarm. The fabulous Moon Gate of the Imperial Palace of Ofang near Beiping was built 2,300 years ago of solid lodestone, a magnetic iron ore, as a protection against assassins. The magnetic attraction of the Moon Gate would betray anyone attempting to enter the palace with a concealed metal object. Thus, Ofang's ingenious Moon Gate anticipated by more than 23 centuries the electronic eye. Believe it or not.
Truth is stranger than fiction. And this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
In Cuba, in 1898, famed surgeon William C. Gorgas performed surgery on a soldier by the light from a jar of fireflies. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you the story of the King of Punishment. King Olav II Haraldsson of Norway, who reigned during the 10th and 11th centuries, took his religion strongly, and he set a severe example for himself when absent-mindedly he desecrated the Sabbath. Olav was whittling wood when a passing servant remarked, "Sire, tomorrow will be Monday." The king, whose shame was so great, picked up a pile of wood chips, placed it on his palm, set fire to it, and watched as the offending limb was entirely consumed. Believe it or not.
Truth is stranger than fiction, and this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
Hugues, the Count of Provence, married first the mother, then the daughter, and finally the widow of King Rodolfo II to become King of Italy. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you about a town clock that hasn't told the right time in 700 years. In 1253, a band of conspirators in Görlitz, Germany, set out to kill the entire city council as they emerged from their midday meal. But one of the plotters warned the police. The town clock was set 7 minutes ahead, and as the criminals converged on City Hall 7 minutes early, they were disarmed. Later, the grateful council passed a law requiring the city to keep the town clock eternally 7 minutes fast as a memorial of their deliverance. Believe it or not.
Truth is stranger than fiction, and this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
The Cathedral of Chartres, ordered destroyed during the French Revolution, was saved because no one in the town would permit the debris to be dumped on his property. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you about a 19th century Superman. Arthur McMurrough Kavanagh of County Carlow in Erie was a respected man in the community. His friends and constituents sent him to Parliament for 14 years. He was an enthusiastic hunter, an avid yachtsman, a clever and keen fisherman, an expert horseman, and a world traveler. He mastered the skills of drafting and painting. He married a beautiful young woman and fathered 7 handsome children. Yet Kavanagh was born without arms and without legs. Believe it or not.
Truth is stranger than fiction, and this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
In Billsdale, England, Ye Old Sun Inn was rented by the Ainsley family continuously for 500 years. In 1944, the Ainsleys finally decided to buy it. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you about the man who changed our eating habits. A French king helped revolutionize the fine art of dining. To avoid staining his snow-white lace collar when he was eating meat with his fingers, King Henry III constructed a crude device of tin and instructed the manager of a well-known Parisian restaurant to have copies made. The king introduced this new implement at a banquet in the restaurant in 1582. That restaurant, the birthplace of the fork, is still in business today under the same name. Believe it or not.
Truth is stranger than fiction, and this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
George Bothwell of Clintonville, Wisconsin, sold his car, and 2 months later, as it was being towed away, it broke loose, careened down the street, and crashed into his store. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you about an odd place to live. Okman, a poor foundling of Lahore, Pakistan, lived for 62 years upon the marble steps of the Mosque of Vizier Khan in Lahore. He was abandoned there by his parents at age 5, and from then on, the marble steps were the only home he knew. Supported by the charity of pious visitors, he lived, ate, and slept there in all kinds of weather, never leaving until he died at the age of 67. Believe it or not.
Truth is stranger than fiction, and this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
Bicker, a city in England, was hit by 12 high-explosive Nazi bombs in World War II, and all of them were duds. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you about the singing sailors. During World War II, a British submarine lay disabled on the ocean floor. After 2 days of frantic efforts, the British Admiralty gave up all hopes of raising her. On orders of the captain, the crew began to sing "Abide With Me." Sedatives were distributed to all hands. One seaman swooned and fell against some equipment. The impact set in motion the jammed surfacing apparatus. The boat rose to the surface and made port safely. Believe it or not.
Truth is stranger than fiction. And this is the proof. This is Ripleys. Believe it or not.
Thomas Brown, a British soldier, lost his nose in the Battle of Dettingen in 1743 and had it replaced by one of solid silver. Believe it or not. In a moment, I'll tell you about a fateful phone call. In November 1944, a sailor on leave named Robert Dwyer entered a service club in Washington at 2 a.m., just in time to take part in a Bible reading contest. He won first prize, a long-distance phone call to his family in Louisiana. There was no answer. However, the operator kept ringing, and by so doing, saved the family from asphyxiation by a deadly gas escaping from a defective heater. Believe it or not.